Removing and replacing parts. HP Pavilion 23G000 All-in-One Desktop PC.
Tools you need. To remove and replace parts in this device, you should ideally have the following tools on hand: an anti-static wrist strap, a Phillips screwdriver, a flat-bladed pry tool, long-nose pliers, a flathead screwdriver, a torque screwdriver, a triangular pry tool, a pair of tweezers, thermal grease and cleaning alcohol, a suction cup, a cuticle stick, a SIM tray eject pin.
How to replace the rear cover. Removal.
To remove the rear cover, first place the unit face down on a soft, flat surface. Loosen each of the 2 captive Phillips No. 2 screws for the rear cover until you can hear the screw making a clicking sound several times. Pry the bottom of the cover up and remove the rear cover from the PC.
Replacement.
The rear cover has several hooks along its outer edge. That fit under tabs along the outer lip of the front bezel. To replace the rear cover, align the top hooks of the cover under their tabs. Press the cover firmly around the edges until all hooks have snapped into place. Note that the bottom corner edges will not yet be flush against the front bezel. Tighten the 2 captured screws on the rear cover until the bottom corner edges of the rear cover are flush against the edge of the outer trim of the front bezel.
How to replace the optical drive. Removal.
To remove the optical drive from the PC, first remove the rear cover. Loosen the captured Phillips No. 2 screw that secures the optical drive to the PC. Push out on the small bracket at the rear of the optical drive and pull the drive out the side of the unit. Detach the 2 Phillips No. 1 screws on the bracket at the rear of the optical drive and remove the bracket.
Replacement.
To install an optical drive, first place the optical drive bracket against the rear of the drive and secure it with 2 Phillips No. 1 screws. Make sure the bottom flat part of the bracket is aligned with the bottom side of the optical drive. To replace the optical drive, slide the drive into its cage on the PC. Tighten the captured screw to secure the optical drive in the PC.
How to replace the converter board. Removal.
To remove the converter board, first remove the rear cover. Carefully detach the power and backlight connectors from the board. Note that the backlight connector location will vary depending on the panel manufacturer. Remove the 2 Torx head screws from the board and pull the board out of the PC.
Replacement.
To replace the converter board, align the 2 holes on the board with the standoffs on the top of the optical drive cage. Replace the 2 Torx head screws for the converter board. Replace the power and backlight connectors to the board. If installing a new converter board or LCD panel, make sure the backlight connector is inserted into the port on the board that matches the connector for that LCD panel manufacturer.
How to replace the foot ring. Removal.
To remove the foot ring, first remove the rear cover. Detach the 6 Torx head screws that secure the foot ring to the middle frame. Each screw location is marked with a stencil M3. Lift the foot ring off of the unit.
Replacement.
The foot ring has 2 small tabs at the top that fit under 2 small ledges on the middle frame. To replace the foot ring, place the foot onto the unit, aligning the tabs under their ledges. Secure the foot ring with its 6 Torx head screws.
How to replace the hard drive. Removal.
To remove the hard drive from the PC, first remove the rear cover. Loosen the captive Phillips No. 2 screw for the hard drive cage. Grasp the handle at the side of the hard drive cage and pull the hard drive cage out to the side, then up and out of the PC. If replacing the hard drive, detach the 4 Phillips No. 2 screws on the sides of the hard drive cage. Note that the screws are different than screws used for other system components. Slide the drive out of the cage.
Replacement.
Before installing a hard drive in the cage, make sure there is a rubber grommet in each side hole of the cage. Install a new grommet into any hole missing a grommet. To replace the hard drive in the cage, slide the drive into the cage until the screw holes on the side of the drive and the cage align. Replace the 4 Phillips No. 2 screws to secure the hard drive to the cage. The hard drive cage has 4 slots on the bottom. That slide under 4 tabs on the middle frame of the PC. To replace the hard drive cage into the PC, place the slots on the cage near their tabs, then slide the cage in sideways until secure. A stencil of an arrow on the hard drive cage should line up with a stencil of a locked padlock on the middle frame when the cage is correctly installed. Tighten the Phillips No. 2 screw to secure the hard drive in the PC.
How to replace the stand. Removal.
To remove the stand, first remove the rear cover. Detach the 3 Phillips No. 2 screws securing the stand to the rear cover. Each screw location is indicated with a stencil. Pull the stand off of the cover.
Replacement.
To replace the stand, insert the stand into its slot on the rear cover until the 3 screw holes on the stand align with the 3 screw holes on the rear cover. Replace the 3 screws to secure the stand to the rear cover.
How to replace the speakers. Removal.
To remove the speakers, first remove the rear cover. Detach the speaker's connector to the motherboard. Free the motherboard connector from its cable guide on the middle frame. Free the speaker's interconnector from its cable guide on the middle frame. Detach the 2 Torx head screws for each speaker. Pull the speakers out of the PC together.
Replacement.
The speakers must be replaced together as a unit. To replace the speakers, place each speaker carefully onto its standoffs. Attach each speaker to the front bezel with its 2 Torx head screws. Tuck the connector between the 2 speakers into its cable guide on the middle frame. Replace the speaker's motherboard connector into its cable guide on the middle frame. And reconnect it to the motherboard.
How to replace the front bezel. Removal.
To replace the front bezel, first remove the rear cover and the speakers. Partially remove the webcam bracket and pull it in towards the middle frame. Place the unit on a raised flat surface no larger than the LCD panel. Detach the 11 screws that secure the front bezel to the middle frame assembly. Each screw is indicated by a stencil of an arrow with 2 circles inside. Carefully pull out on the edges of the front bezel until it drops down onto the work surface below the middle frame assembly. Remove the middle frame assembly and raised surface.
Replacement.
The front bezel has some hooks on the inside edge of the bezel that attach onto small edges on the sides of the middle frame. To install a new front bezel, first place the bezel face down on the work surface. Place the raised flat surface and the middle frame assembly inside the front bezel. Carefully pull up the front bezel, pressing the hooks into place along the edges. Replace the 11 screws to secure the front bezel to the middle frame assembly. Each screw is located by a stencil of an arrow with 2 circles inside. Replace the webcam to the top of the front bezel.
How to replace the power button board. Removal.
To remove the power button board, first remove the rear cover. Detach the Torx head screw that secures the power button board assembly to the middle frame. Partially remove the power button board assembly. Detach the connector from the board to fully remove the assembly from the unit. Detach the 2 Phillips No. 1 screws that secure the power button board to its bracket. Pull the board off of the bracket.
Replacement.
To replace the power button board, first place the board onto its bracket and secure with 2 Phillips No. 1 screws. The power button bracket has 2 small slots that fit over 2 small tabs on the middle frame. There is also a small guide on the front bezel that the edge of the assembly fits into. To replace the power button board assembly, first reattach the power button board connector to the board. Align the 2 slots of the bracket into their tabs and the front edge into its guides until the bracket is correctly seated. Secure the power button board bracket to the middle frame with its Torx head screw.
How to replace the motherboard EMI shield. Removal.
To remove the motherboard EMI shield, first remove the rear cover. Remove the two Phillips number 2 screws securing the motherboard shield to the PC. Note the size of the shield and location of the screws will be different depending on the motherboard installed in the unit. The screw locations are indicated by a stencil of an arrow with no circles inside. Tilt up the side of the shield and pull it off the unit.
Replacement.
The motherboard shield has either 2 or 3 tabs at its outer edge. That align into 2 or 3 slots on the middle frame. To replace the motherboard shield, align the tabs on the side of the shield into their slots. Then swing and press the shield into place. Replace the two Phillips number 2 screws to secure the motherboard EMI shield to the middle frame.
How to replace the system memory. Removal.
To remove or replace system memory, first remove the rear cover and the motherboard EMI shield. Next, gently pull out on the retaining lever located on each side of the SO-DIMM memory module. The module will pop up from its socket. Pull the module out of the socket.
Replacement.
There is a small notch on one side of each SO-DIMM memory module. There is a small tab on one side of each SO-DIMM socket. To replace an SO-DIMM memory module, angle the module to about 30 degrees, engaging the notch into its socket tab. Press the module down into place until the retaining levers snap into position over the sides of the module.
How to replace the optical drive cable. Removal.
To remove the optical drive cable, first remove the rear cover, the motherboard shield, and the optical drive. Detach the optical drive power and data connectors from the motherboard. Free the connectors from the cable guides that run from the motherboard to the optical drive cage. Detach the two Torx head screws for the optical drive cable and remove it from the unit.
Replacement.
To replace the optical drive cable, align the holes on the cable over the standoffs on the PC. Replace the two screws to secure the cable to the middle frame. Replace the connectors into the cable guides running from the optical drive to the motherboard. Replace the optical drive power and data connectors to the motherboard.
How to replace the hard drive cable. Removal.
To remove the hard drive cable, first remove the rear cover, the motherboard shield, and the hard drive. Detach the hard drive power and data connectors from the motherboard. Free the connectors from their cable guide on the middle frame. Detach the two Torx head screws for the hard drive cable. Pull the cable out of the unit.
Replacement.
To replace the hard drive cable, press the holes on the hard drive cable over the standoffs on the PC. Replace the two screws to secure the hard drive cable to the middle frame. Secure the connectors into the cable guide on the middle frame. Replace the hard drive power and data connectors to the motherboard.
How to replace the LCD panel kit. Removal.
To replace the LCD panel, first remove the rear cover, the speakers, the front bezel, and the motherboard EMI shield. Detach the backlight cable from the converter board. Free the backlight cable from the cable guides on the middle frame. Detach the LVDS cable from the motherboard. Detach the 2 Torx head screws on each side of the middle frame assembly that secure the LCD panel to the middle frame assembly. Each screw location is indicated by a stencil of an arrow with 1 circle inside and the number 23. Carefully lift the middle frame assembly off of the LCD panel. Detach the 4 Torx head screws, 2 on each side, that secure the LCD brackets to the LCD panel. Note, these screws are shorter than other Torx head system screws. Pull the brackets off the panel. Remove the LVDS cable from the panel.
Replacement.
The LCD panel kit includes the LCD panel with matching backlight cable. To replace an LCD panel kit, first install an LVDS cable to the back of the panel. Place the side brackets on the panel and secure with their 4 Torx head screws on the sides of the brackets. Align the middle frame assembly over the back of the LCD panel, feeding up the backlight and LVDS cables through their access holes on the middle frame, before fully lowering the middle frame. Secure the LCD panel to the middle frame with 4 Torx head screws. Each screw location is indicated by a stencil of an arrow with 1 circle inside and the number 23. Replace the LVDS cable to the motherboard. Replace the backlight cable into its cable guides on the middle frame. And reconnect it to the converter board in the port that matches the backlight cable for that particular LCD panel manufacturer.
How to replace the system fan. Removal.
To remove the system fan, first remove the rear cover and the motherboard EMI shield. Note that the system fan comes in very different shapes depending on which motherboard is installed in the unit. Detach the system fan connector from the motherboard. The connector location will vary depending on the motherboard installed in the unit. Free the connector from its cable guide on the middle frame if that fan uses a cable guide for the connector. Detach the 3 Torx head screws for the system fan. Note the screw locations will be different for each fan depending on the motherboard installed in the unit. Pull the system fan out of the unit.
Replacement.
To replace the system fan, align the 3 holes on the fan with the 3 standoffs on the middle frame. Replace the 3 screws for the system fan. Replace the fan connector into its cable guide on the middle frame if that fan uses a cable guide for the connector. Reconnect the connector to the motherboard.
How to replace the thermal module's OME units. Removal.
To remove the thermal module, if present in the unit, first remove the rear cover and the motherboard EMI shield. The thermal module installed will be different depending on the motherboard installed in the unit. Loosen the screws for the thermal module over the CPU and GPU, if present in the unit, in the order indicated on the module. Some modules will have 8 screws, and some will have 4 screws. Some modules will also have a Torx head system screw at the radiator end of the thermal module. Remove it if present in the unit. Carefully lift the thermal module out of the unit.
Replacement.
Before replacing the thermal module, first clean off the thermal grease from the CPU. The GPU, if present in the unit, and the thermal module. Apply new thermal grease or a thermal pad to the CPU. And GPU, if present in the unit. Carefully align the thermal module back into the unit, positioning it carefully above the CPU. Tighten the 4 or 8 screws for the thermal module over the CPU and GPU, if present in the unit, in the order indicated by the stencils on the module. Replace the screw near the radiator end of the module.
How to replace the CPU Intel units. Removal.
To remove the CPU in units with a removable CPU, first remove the rear cover, the motherboard EMI shield, and the thermal module. Press down to release the CPU load lever from its retention tab and pull it back. Lift the load plate off the socket and then remove the microprocessor from the motherboard.
Replacement.
To replace the CPU, first identify pin 1 position on the microprocessor by noting the yellow mark on the corner of the chip assembly. Identify pin 1 on the socket by the mark on the corner of the socket stencil. Align the assembly to pin 1 on the motherboard when replacing the CPU into its socket. Swing the load plate down. Lock the load lever under its retaining tab to secure the microprocessor in place.
How to replace the wireless LAN antennas. Removal.
Units will come with either 1 or 2 wireless antennas installed. To remove the wireless antennas, first remove the rear cover and the motherboard EMI shield. Detach the wireless antenna or antennas from the wireless LAN card. Pull the antenna or antennas out from the cable guides above the motherboard that run to the main antenna location. If just one antenna is installed, Carefully pry that main antenna off the middle frame and remove it from the unit. If the unit has a second wireless antenna, free it from its remaining guides along the top of the unit. Pry the second antenna off the middle frame and remove it from the unit.
Replacement.
There are stencils on the middle frame to indicate the location and placement of the wireless antennas. To replace the wireless antennas, first press the adhesive side of the second antenna, if present in the unit, onto the top of the middle frame in its indicated location. Secure the connector for the second antenna into its cable guides along the top of the middle frame. Press the first antenna into place in its stenciled location. Secure the antenna or antennas into the cable guides above the motherboard. Reattach the antenna connector or connectors to the card. The black, or main antenna, should go in the port labeled 1, and the white auxiliary antenna should go into the port labeled 2.
How to restore the CMOS to factory settings.
CMOS factory settings should be restored as a first step before replacing the system motherboard. To restore CMOS factory settings, first remove the rear cover and the motherboard EMI shield. Remove the battery from the motherboard. Wait 30 seconds. Replace the battery to the motherboard. CMOS factory settings are now reset. Note that you will now need to enter System BIOS and reset the clock in BIOS after this procedure.
How to replace the motherboard. Removal.
To remove the motherboard, first remove the rear cover and the motherboard EMI shield. Remove the wireless LAN card and system memory. Remove the CPU thermal module and the CPU if the unit has a removable thermal module and CPU. If removing the CPU, install a socket cover on the load plate window before removing the CPU and replacing the load plate over the socket. Detach all system connectors to the motherboard. Depending on the motherboard installed in the unit, the board is secured with either 5 or 9 screws. Remove the screws. Lift the motherboard off of the PC. Place the motherboard in an anti-static bag.
Replacement.
To replace the motherboard, align the screw holes on the motherboard with the standoffs on the PC, clearing any connectors away from the side of the board. Replace the 5 screws or 9 screws to secure the motherboard to the middle frame, depending on the motherboard you're installing. Reattach all system connectors to the board.
Find more helpful videos on our HP Support YouTube channel.